Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here and welcome to you all from INTDEV Connect. My name is Miriam and I'm the Chief Partnerships and Growth Officer here at INTDEV Connect. So today I'm really excited to welcome an incredible guest to our podcast. My guest today holds a very special place in my heart, not only as a former colleague and mentor, but also as a very, very dear friend. Throughout her remarkable career, she has raised millions in funding for some leading development and humanitarian organizations around the world. Her ability to influence decision makers and reshape strategic frameworks has amplified impact where it matters most. Good afternoon, Anna. Such an absolute pleasure to have you here. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Miriam. Nice to see you. Thank you for inviting me.
Anna, so you have been fundraising since forever. And more than ever before, it seems to be stuck in this cycle of urgency rather than strategy. So I guess we are really keen to understand from your experience and expertise, what are the biggest signs that the current model is not working?
Thanks for making me feel old to start. I think the biggest thing that we notice already in terms of what's not working is this reliance that we have on traditional funding channels. I mean, of course, what's happened lately in the world with the cuts in aid and reductions in institutional funding has really highlighted that. And so many organisations now are shifting to a sort of private first approach as a result of that. So needing to lean in more on private fundraising channels, including major donors, corporates, foundations, and as well as individual giving. So I think really seeing that there's a need now to sort of pivot and think about different ways of doing things. And I think what's also been as a result of this reliance on traditional channels is, innovation's really sort of stagnated. So we're not really being inventive enough in terms of new ideas and being able to adapt with donors themselves. So traditional ways of fundraising like events and sponsorship and direct mail are still kind of the staple. And we need to be able to be adapting more to innovative financing mechanisms, peer-to-peer platforms and other things to really be able to keep up with donors, I think. And also really have some good strategic planning, make sure we have some good 5-year plans in place with a clear direction, clear goals, clear metrics. So it's clear what direction we're in. So we're a bit more resilient when these difficult times come. So I think this reliance on traditional funding is definitely been a challenge, an example of what's not working. I think another piece is just fundraising itself being quite a low priority for a number of organisations. I think we've had experience of that before. Which is it gets deprioritised and the focus goes away from donor cultivation. And so we see that organisations end up being in this sort of reactive rather than proactive mode. So they're sort of chasing grants or sending appeals, and that's that causes a lot more stress and overwork often on fundraisers too. And then of course that in turn leads to skilled fundraisers leaving organisations, right? We see this high turnover then of skilled fundraisers, and that of course not only impacts income, but because it also impacts the donor relationships themselves. I think fundraising not being prioritised is definitely another challenge. I think internally there's also an issue with silos that often, particularly in large organisations, the fundraising is often not integrated. It's not integrated together with communications, with program and leadership in the same way as other areas. And this and I've seen this too, like when I've been working even in my own channel. I mean, I'm mainly focused on foundations and philanthropy, and very often in some large organisations there are silos even between foundations and corporates and major donors. So, I think that automatically, all those sorts of things can impact stewardship and cultivation. So I think internal silos are something that's also a challenge with the current model, and also indicates the need for stronger leadership to be able to kind of champion fundraising internally, including with boards. Our fund in having strong board engagement and boards that are also focusing and prioritising fundraising strategy and donor networking in order to kind of help organisations be successful. And I think the final thing is really, I guess, I think what's a challenge with the current model is donor fatigue and rising expectations that we see from donors. So funders increasingly want this deeper engagement, no longer wanting these transactional relationships. And I see this again quite commonly in my sort of area in foundations and philanthropy, where these types of funders are really becoming more strategic, more niche in their focus, and they're looking for bigger, more anchor type partnerships where they can really demonstrate impact and have these trusted relationships. And so, an example of a successful partnership like that recently was with UNHCR, who recently secured a large partnership with the MasterCard Foundation, which I think is a really good example of how they were able to build a really long-term strategic partnership to support refugees. I think these challenges, these things within our model are what's been hindering us, and what's something that we're going to have to think about changing.
Thank you so much for that, Anna. I think that was a really thoughtful response. And you kind of touched on a lot of common areas that we are also seeing in our work as challenges and constraints. I think you already alluded to other models of doing this better, such as private sector fundraising or focusing on more innovative financing models. But I guess my question to you is, if the current model is not working, then what should organizations prioritize to build a more sustainable approach? And I think there was something in your answer about getting rid of silos and working more closely together. I understand from my perspective, as somebody who has worked with institutional partnerships, that is so essential, particularly in context of match funding, and to bring different partners and stakeholders together. But what do you think would be the model or the approach to prioritize to ensure more sustainability in funding?
Yeah, no, I think there's a few things, and I think definitely what you've touched on, Miriam, as well. I think the key thing really is having a really strong, sustainable fundraising strategy. I think that's really important. That's something that aligns with your mission and that has smart goals. These smart, what's it, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time bound. I think that's really key, and linking those to your donor campaigns, to your work, which really helps to not only empower your organisation, but also to help donors have a clearer understanding of the organisation's impact. And I think, within your strategy, then you can include diversified income streams. So building a portfolio that includes all the different channels we were discussing before. So institutional, but also the private streams, such as individual giving, corporate foundations, but also new areas like digital or innovative finance as well. So having a more diverse funding portfolio as part of that strategy. And I think also, being able to build into the strategy some agility for planning and continuous measurement. So making sure that you're ready to pivot when things go bad, when economic conditions change, or when donors' priorities change. So thinking about things like quarterly reviews to make sure that you're assessing your goals and strategies, but also like piloting like smaller campaigns or smaller projects that can then be scaled, and setting up, real-time KPIs to sort of measure what's happening. So I think having a strong strategy and with an agile mindset, I think can really help to maximize return on investment when things are difficult, particularly. I think as well, you touched on it now, but I think particularly from my lens, again, with looking at foundations and philanthropy and I think it goes across the fundraising channels. I think building long-term donor relationships is really another important piece in terms of being more sustainable. So, cultivating and stewarding donors, and building these trust-based partnerships that I was describing before are really, I think, really key, both for all the different income channels, as I said. And I know, I'm currently working with Save the Children, and Save Italy recently celebrated a 15-year partnership with Bulgari, which I think says a lot about how they've been able to build a really long-term partnership there that's really continued to support the organisation and to support children. So I think long-term relationships are key. And also I think having credibility with donors as part of that. So really being able to embrace sort of ethical and sustainable approaches. So being financially transparent, thinking about your carbon footprint. So you can be align with donor values and continue to be like a credible partner, but also to sort of future-proof your own organisation in terms of your own reputation, which is so important when we're trying to be fundraising out in the world. And I think the final thing is really, it's for me, particularly thinking about international development. I think investing in local partnerships and capacity building, as you were sort of saying before, Miriam, I think really is important now to be in terms of being sustainable. Again, in my sort of lane, a lot of the philanthropic donors particularly are really increasingly becoming more decentralized. Funders like the Gates Foundation or MasterCard Foundation. And so to be able to be successful with these partners, it's really important to be able to engage directly with them in country. And so, of course, now, real sustainability and international fundraising, comes from being able to empower your actors on the ground. So I think, and we've talked about this, I think NGOs, particularly INGOs, are going to need to really think about how to change in terms of our role and becoming part of an ecosystem of partners going forward. So that will mean things like, I think, considering identifying training local organisations in fundraising, also co-designing programmes with community stakeholders, and thinking about reducing overheads, in terms of like decentralising operations. So I think there's all these different pieces. I think taking a more localized approach will really enhance the trust that you build with donors, because it will align with their approaches, and I think that will hopefully help with more successful fundraising and opening up new donor market.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that. Again, a very well thought through response. You touched on a few incredibly important issues that are actually right now really relevant. From I guess, from my point of view, there's one side about building local capacities and localization, but there's also this other angle, or this realization almost, that being in the global north, we cannot do everything without the risk of spreading ourselves too thin. So I guess from that point of view, it's really important to accept what we can do, leverage those areas where we can add real value, build on those and highlight those key pillars, and then essentially build local capacities to respond to crises as appropriate and as relevant in terms of their context and resonance. So I guess with that said, in times of economic uncertainty as we are facing today, especially with the devolution of and mergers of certain aid agencies, funding cuts, etc., many organizations, who are stuck in this process of almost rebranding themselves or recalibrating their approach, they're faced with pressure to cut costs. So there are essentially two parts to this question. So what are the most valuable skills, according to you, to retain in teams when budgets are tight? And then when should an organization consider bringing in external expertise?
Yeah, sure. I think I can probably best if I look at this with my, as I keep saying, Philanthropy Foundation hat, because that's the one I've been wearing for 25 plus years. So I'll probably lean in on that knowledge for this to answer that. But I think the key things that I would say are, to valuable skills to retain in these times is really about donor relationship management. Said already about how important it is to build long-term relationships. So I think retaining staff who understand donor stewardship and who've got skills in relationship building is really key. I think another thing to think about is really having strong communications, like a really strong, compelling stories, and also strong evidence of your organization and your impact. So I think making sure there's a clear mission-driven narrative and a strong communication on that, and people that can be able to present that for your organization, and also a way of being able to capture your evidence and of your impact in terms of it, and being able to communicate that. I think particularly for major gift and for philanthropy foundation fundraising, I think a skill that's very important to retain is is proposal writing. So making sure that you have people in place to be able to draft and create strong, compelling funding proposals. I mean, if you're going to be doing more institutional type funding or getting grants that are in that space, these are really require sort of specialist skills. I think that it's really valuable to retain internally in order to be able to go after those opportunities. And I think the other thing I'd say is, again, I was talking about keeping space always to be adaptable and be able to be creative when things are challenging, and to be able to have some space for some creative problem solving. So I think things are difficult. I think it's even more important that we have fresh ideas and that we're able to pivot quickly. As part of that, when budgets are tight, sometimes bringing in external consultants can help with that, in terms of bringing in a fresh perspective. People who don't have an internal bias, who can bring innovative new ideas. And often they have just more bandwidth than internal staff to help with doing that. And so as a result, that they can be faster on delivering in terms of return on investment. I think another point is also then about adaptability and being able to have space for creative problem solving. So, of course, when budgets are tight, but we still require fresh ideas and need to be able to pivot quickly, this becomes even more important. And so, thinking about bringing in external consultants is one way to help. And obviously, outsourcing can then sometimes be cheaper than having full-time specialists, which makes it sometimes a more cost-effective option. And I mean, I worked as an external consultant in the past. I did some work with IRC a few years ago, on working on helping them develop a strategy and do some management and building of one of their new business teams, which enabled the fundraising foundation team, to focus on their fundraising, and they were able to, I think, succeed in having some significant income growth during that period, partly as a result of that.
Thank you so much for that, Anna. That was very detailed and very helpful. I guess this brings us to the next topic, which is essentially overcoming resistance to change. And I'm sure you must have seen that in your career. I certainly have. So I guess from a funding constraints point of view, what would you say are the biggest barriers to shifting to a more strategic funding model, or fundraising model rather, and how do you see the leadership of organizations overcoming that? Many organizations now, as we've already discussed, are operating in a more survival budgeting mode than strategy or vision. So, and fundraising is often seen as a cost center. So how can mainstreaming the fundraising function help overcome the income insecurity that many organizations are facing right now?
Yes. No, I think one of the biggest barriers to shifting to a more strategic model is, internal culture. I think we've touched on that already, and I think the fact that fundraising is often treated as this sort of transactional standalone function is the part of the problem, and instead of becoming this organizational priority. And how we can change that. I mean, I think, as you've touched on, leadership is really needed in terms of being able to sort of champion fundraising internally, alongside the other key functions like program delivery and communications. And it's really key if you want to be able to sort of pilot new ideas and approaches and be successful in scaling up new tactics. So I think ways to think about doing that, maybe to consider, are things like really trying to secure executive sponsorship for fundraising. So trying to have internal champions that can really speak for fundraising, and incorporating fundraising KPIs as part of strategic plans. I think also considering allocating dedicated resources internally for fundraising. So really trying to ring fence budgets where possible to make sure there's space to pilot fundraising projects, and also to think about professional development for fundraisers. And I think, touching on what I spoke about before, this issue of silos, really trying to break down those silos. So trying to encourage more collaboration through, for example, cross-functional working groups, and also sort of sharing donor insights internally. So staff can know more about fundraising, maybe considering things like innovation labs where staff can come together and brainstorm ideas. So I think trying to bring people together internally to make sure that there's better collaboration. And I think we can really see the difference when fundraising is embedded in an organisation, because it can then start to unlock, more income diversification, which of course will reduce financial vulnerability, which is key. And we can see in some organisations that means things like shared revenue goals, which includes country teams and country leaders that take some accountability for that. So, transforming your organisation to one that's where you've really got this kind of collective capability and accountability for fundraising, which can really help create a culture of innovation and fundraising where everyone has this shared responsibility. And I think once that happens, then you can see that it's easier to adapt and to thrive when a landscape becomes unpredictable and is changing as it is now. So yeah.
This brings us nearly to the end of our very insightful and exciting podcast, Anna. And as we wrap up, what's your one piece of advice that you would share with leaders that are feeling particularly overwhelmed by the fundraising challenges and constraints?
Yeah, one piece of advice. Well, this is something that I take with me, and I've been working in a lot of large organisations where it's often easy to feel overwhelmed by a lot of what's going on. And I think the key thing I can say is, it's really important to focus on what you can control, like keep things simple and you can build momentum from there. Because of course, global fundraising is, it has a lot of complex variables. We've touched on a lot of them with these economic shifts, the donor fatigue, all of these different pieces. So I think real progress and success can come from being really strategic and really trying to narrow your scope. So, I'd say start with identifying just one area where you think you can make some tangible impact. So that might be, strengthening one key partnership, or focusing on, refining your fundraising narrative, whatever it might be, or, focusing on your team. But I think these small wins can really can build confidence and also create a ripple effect. So I think it's also important to remember that, you're not alone, that you can, don't be afraid to reach out to peers, to mentors, or even to seek, external help to bring these fresh perspectives and things that you need to keep moving forward. And I think sometimes the best strategy is, just to pause, to try and recalibrate, to reconnect back with your purpose. And then I think sometimes things then become a lot clearer.
Thank you so much, Anna, for joining us today and for sharing your actionable insights and intel with us. This has all been super exciting and super helpful. Not only us, I hope that also for our audience. For our listeners, if you're looking to transform your fundraising strategy, INTDEV offers tailored support to help you move from reactive to more proactive and strategic partnerships. Visit our website at www.intdevconnect.com to learn more. Link in description. And this concludes our Chatham House Rules, but stay tuned for more exciting chats. See you soon. Bye.